So let me start by asking the question that I think a lot of us find ourselves wondering about, which is the current generation really different from the earlier generation? I mean, is it oversimplified to say that people of my age were really engaged in protest, in trying to object to the way the world was and try to change it in that sort of way, whereas the current generation is much more concerned about helping individual people, working within school systems, working within not-for-profits. But is there a difference? And if there is a difference, what brought that about? And what is it? Is there anything in that change that is important for us to know? It's also possible it's an oversimplification or wrong. Diane, what do you think?
So I think what we have now is real pointed ways that service is highlighted, service is encouraged, and a real pathway for those that choose to serve. I think my position that I'm New York City's first ever Chief Service Officer, but really I am the nation's first Chief Service Officer. And we are incredibly excited, we meaning the Mayor's Office, Mayor Bloomberg, to have the support of foundations such as Rockefeller, where we have recently launched the ability to have a cities of service. And so we plan before June for there to be 10 other Chief Service Officers across this country. And so I don't know if the difference is fundamentally the people of the generation, or if it is rather that what we are seeing now is an outgrowth of the former generation's commitment to service. And we're seeing the fruits of that.
But you said something that I think is, again, I think my mic is not on.
You want my old one?
You said something I think is worth highlighting as a possibility. And that is that the structures that are now available to help people go into service
Right.
are really critical to having more of it. And there was less before, more now, and that's a good thing.
Definitely, and they're clearer.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. I think what we've seen is an evolution of the opportunities for service, not only being clarified, but being expanded, not only service to cities or to our nation, but increasingly service around the world. And those mechanisms, certainly in my day as an undergraduate, were simply not available.
Right.
And I think that is one crucial issue. But I'll go back to Lee's original question, and as a well-trained Columbia social psychologist, say that I really do think it's a person-situation interaction. So I think we all are products of our times. And I do think that in the crucible of the 60s, people really were burned with a sense that they could change the world. We felt we stopped the war. And our actions after that were really very much influenced by that set of experiences. Those who followed in the 70s and 80s had a different set of experiences, and I think it made them different in response to their view of how directly they felt they could impact political processes and political outcomes. So that I think what we started to see at the end of the last century was people seeking more individualized ways to express their service aspirations, because they could see a more tangible cause and
That's
effect.
interesting, yeah.
I tutor and I can produce this
Right,
outcome.
right.
I ask my government to do something, so what?
Yeah.
You know, and nothing happens anyway. And I think one of the resonances why young people were so attracted to Barack Obama and why they voted in such record numbers was this return of the view that maybe you could influence government, that government could be there in a way that you could feel would be directly affected by what you believed in and what outcomes you wanted to produce. And it'll be really interesting to see now this generation who has both the formal structures and now perhaps the belief in a more tangible cause and effect outcome into politics and what they will produce. I think it'll be fascinating.
Yes, very interesting. Dale?
It's a very interesting question I think you're asking. And I'm wondering exactly what the new generation, young people today, are doing that you didn't do, for example. But I think each generation has its own challenges. If I think back in this country, in the United States, in the Western world, what was going on during slavery? People were fighting, how do we abolish slavery, for example? That was one of the challenges that that generation had. And if we go back to African countries, for example, what was going on for so many years, colonialism, who actually was thinking about all that? There was that generation. I was born during independence. I didn't see colonialism. So my parents would say, so what? What do you do? What is your next challenge, for example? So I don't think about colonialism. I don't think about slavery or something else. I think about something else. And I think this is exactly what what makes difference between generations. But today, maybe people here, for example, in medical field, for example, the example of HIV. I think the new generation has been facing a huge challenge. How do we actually tackle this issue of HIV, for example? 8 years ago or so, there were stories, actually not just until recently, about whether HIV drug, for example, could be given to poor people in African countries. And there were a lot of questions. One of my friends, Paul Farmer, who worked so hard in Haiti and giving HIV drugs to poor people who, and we're talking about poor people, it's those who have no roof, have no shelter, have nothing to eat. Poor people can take HIV drugs indeed. And how did he actually work with people, with the students? I give an example of Face AIDS, for example, which was started by students at Stanford. And they raise awareness, they raise a lot of money. And you can see that, a lot of people in colleges and even high school are becoming aware of this horrible disease and really changing the world. Now HIV drugs available to everyone who is able to see a health care provider. So I think it's every generation has its challenges, and it is important to also know how do we communicate, for example. Did you have access to internet, for example? How did we reach out to people? Now there's a lot available, and we should, I think, think about all this, which is interesting.
Well, I think what you and Judy just said is worth pausing on, because